The first time Nathan saw her again, it was by accident, or maybe not. Life had a strange way of setting quiet traps, of folding time so that the past felt just a street away. He was walking along the riverbank, the one lined with crooked willow trees and benches that always seemed half asleep in the late afternoon sun. He didn't plan to stop there. He never did anymore. But something about the wind, or the stillness of the water, made him slow down, and there she was. Clara, not exactly the way he remembered her, her hair a little shorter now, her face softer, maybe older. But the way she held herself, the quiet certainty in her eyes, that hadn't changed. She was standing by the railing, a paper coffee cup in hand, watching the reflection of the sky tremble in the river's current. He froze. 5 years had passed. 5 years of silence, of messages unsent, of dreams rewritten. And yet, in that moment, it all folded back into the same fragile present. She didn't see him at first. And maybe that was for the best. He could have turned, walked away, let the years stay buried. But something in him refused, a quiet, stubborn voice that said, "If not now, then when?" He approached slowly. "Clara," he said, and his voice carried more hesitation than he'd meant. She turned, startled, then still, as if her memory was trying to catch up to reality. "Nathan," she whispered. Her lips curved into something between a smile and disbelief. "God, it's been forever." He laughed, though it came out strained. 5 years. Almost forever. They stood there for a moment, the air thick with everything that hadn't been said. The river kept moving, the sun began to slip lower, and the world around them seemed to pause. Waiting, they decided to walk. It felt safer than standing still. The streets were familiar, cobblestone, narrow, lined with old bookstores and the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting from a corner cart. Clara had always loved that smell. Nathan remembered the way she used to hold a bag of them close to her chest during winter, letting the heat soak through her gloves. They talked about small things first: work, the city, how time had slipped by like sand through their fingers. She was teaching now, literature at a small school just outside town. He was doing photography, the kind that barely paid but somehow kept him alive. And then, somewhere between the laughter and the pauses, the real question began to hum beneath their words. What happened to us? Neither of them said it, but both felt it at one point. She stopped by a bookstore window, her reflection mingling with the display of forgotten novels. "You still carry your camera?" she asked. "Always," he said. "It's how I remember things." She smiled faintly. "And do you still run from the things you don't want to remember?" He didn't answer. There wasn't much to say. Some truths just hung there. Heavy, unspoken, undeniable. Later, they sat in a small cafe that hadn't changed in a decade. The same wooden tables, the same soft jazz whispering from an old speaker. Nathan caught himself staring at the window, where rain had begun to trace lines across the glass. "It's funny," Clara said softly. "We used to dream about leaving this place. You with your camera, me with my notebooks. We said we'd go everywhere." "We did," he murmured. "Just not together." She looked down, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "You know, I thought about calling you once. After everything. But I didn't know what I'd say." He nodded. "I wouldn't have known what to say either." They both smiled, the kind of smile that hurt. The kind that came from recognizing how time changes people, but not the quiet gravity between them. When they finally left the cafe, night had already draped itself over the city. The rain had turned into mist, soft and cold, wrapping the streets in silver light. Clara pulled her coat tighter, and Nathan offered to walk her home. She hesitated but agreed. They didn't talk much on the way. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just full, like the calm before a song begins. At one point, she stopped to look at the old clock tower near the square. "You remember that?" she asked. "We used to meet there after classes." "I remember," he said. "You were always late." "I wasn't late," she laughed. "You were early." He smiled. Same difference. They stood there, the clock ticking softly above them, each second echoing through the years they'd lost. For a fleeting moment, it felt like nothing had changed, as if they could still rewrite everything, start again. But then reality crept back in. The years, the choices, the lives built separately. When they reached her building, she turned to him. "It was good to see you, Nathan," she said. "Really? You too?" he replied. There was a pause. The kind that asked for more but settled for less. "Maybe," she said quietly, We'll run into each other again. He nodded, though he knew the odds. Maybe. And then she was gone, a door closing softly behind her. Leaving him alone with the sound of rain and the faint hum of the city, Nathan stood there for a while, watching the light in her window flicker once, then fade. It felt like watching a chapter close, not with an ending, but with a whisper. He turned, lifted his camera, and took a photo, not of her, not of the building, but of the space between streetlights, where shadows turned gold and memory lingered. The shutter clicked. A quiet echo in the dark. That night, back in his apartment, Nathan loaded the photograph into his computer. It wasn't perfect, the focus slightly off, the light uneven, but somehow it captured everything he couldn't say. The emptiness, the beauty, the ache of things that almost were. He stared at it for a long time. Then he opened a folder marked unfinished. Inside were hundreds of images, streets, hands, faces, skies, each one a fragment of something he'd once wanted to hold on to. He added this photo to the collection. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like deleting it. The days that followed were quiet. But something had shifted, subtly, like the way the air changes before a storm. Nathan found himself walking the same streets again, revisiting corners of the city he'd avoided for years. He started noticing things, the way morning light hit the shop windows, the laughter spilling from cafes, the small, ordinary beauty of people just living. Maybe seeing Clara again hadn't broken him open. Maybe it had simply reminded him that he wasn't done feeling that 18 night. He'd look through his photos and think about time, how it moved, how it healed, how it never really stopped. He wondered if Clara thought of him too. And in some quiet way, he hoped she did. The week after Nathan saw Clara felt unreal, as if life had slipped into a quieter dimension. He went about his routine, morning coffee, editing photos, taking the same train into the city. But everything carried a faint hum of something unfinished. Everywhere he went, he found traces of her. A stranger's laugh in a cafe that sounded like hers, the smell of rain on old pavement, the reflection of light through glass. All of it dragged him back to moments they hadn't spoken of, memories that still lingered under the surface that he told himself it was coincidence. But it didn't feel like it. One afternoon, he received a message. Unknown number. No greeting. Just a photo. It was a shot of the riverbank. The same place they'd met that day. Beneath it, "You forgot this." He frowned, confused, until he noticed what was in the frame. His old film roll. He must have dropped it from his jacket pocket when he took that last photo. He typed back before he could think. "Nathan, I didn't even notice. Thank you. Clara, you should come get it. I developed it for you." He blinked. Developed it? A moment later, another message arrived. "Clara, I remembered how careful you were with your photos. Thought you'd want this one to be done right." He met her at a small photography lab near the old part of town, one of those places that smelled of dust, film, and memory. She was waiting outside, holding an envelope. "Hope you don't mind," she said, handing it to him. Curiosity got the better of me. I didn't look much. Nathan smiled slightly. "I trust you." "Big mistake," she teased. But her eyes were soft, inside the envelope. He found several prints, the photo of the streetlight he'd taken that night, a few random shots he didn't remember snapping, and one picture of her silhouette against the rain-blurred window. He froze. He hadn't realized he'd taken that one. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, looking over his shoulder. "You always had a way of finding light in the ordinary." He looked at her, and for a moment, the room felt too small, too full of things left unsaid. "Maybe I was just trying to hold on to something," he said. Her smile faded a little. "You always were." They walked again after that, not out of nostalgia, but because it felt natural. Sometimes through parks, sometimes along streets they used to know. They didn't talk about the past much. Instead, they filled the silence with stories about the present, her students, his clients, how both of them were trying to feel like they belonged somewhere again. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something gentler, slower, like two people learning how to breathe in the same rhythm again. Still, there were moments when the air between them grew heavier, charged with that old electricity. When their hands brushed by accident, or when one of them laughed a second too long. Once, after an evening walk, she said, "You know, I thought time would dull it. That feeling, but it didn't." He looked at her. "The feeling of what?" "Of being seen," she whispered. He wanted to tell her he felt the same, that no one had seen him quite like she did. But the words wouldn't come. They never did when it mattered. The following weekend, she invited him to one of her classes. She was giving her students an assignment on storytelling, how to find emotion in simplicity. Nathan sat quietly in the back as she spoke about the power of observation, of noticing the invisible details in everyday life. At one point, she said, "Art isn't about what's perfect. It's about what's true." He felt something stir inside him then, a realization that maybe this, too, was part of their unfinished story. Not the reunion of lovers, but of two artists who had once lost their way and found meaning in each other again. After class, they went for coffee. She told him she was considering applying for a year-long literature program in Paris. He felt his stomach tighten, though he smiled. "That sounds like you," he said. "I don't know if I'll get in," she admitted, "but it feels like something I should try." "You should," he said, and meant it, even if it meant losing her again. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about how people drift, not always because they want to, but because life has its own gravity. He got up, grabbed his camera, and went outside. The streets were empty, washed in amber light. He started taking photos of puddles, reflections, the faint movement of curtains behind apartment windows. He didn't know why, only that he needed to capture something before it slipped away again. By dawn, he had taken nearly 200 shots. Most were nothing special, but one, a frame of the city skyline with a single bird crossing the sky, made his chest ache. He sent it to Clara. No caption. An hour later, her reply came. "Clara, it's beautiful. Lonely, but beautiful." Nathan, "Maybe that's what beauty is sometimes." Clara, "Maybe." Then, after a pause, Clara, "Can I use it? For a lesson?" Nathan, "You don't even have to ask." As weeks passed, their messages grew more frequent. Some were light, others quiet. A photo of her classroom. A snapshot he'd taken of a stray cat sleeping in a bookstore window. A quote from a novel. A song linked that it wasn't love in the way it used to be, full of urgency and fear of losing. It was steadier now, a thread of connection that didn't demand anything. Still, one night, after a glass too many of wine, Nathan sent her a message he immediately regretted. "Nathan, do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't let go?" She didn't reply. Not that night. Not the next morning. The third day, he tried to pretend it didn't matter. But when he finally saw her again, she looked quieter somehow. "I got your message," she said softly. He exhaled. "I shouldn't have." "No," she interrupted. "You should have. Because I've thought about it too." The silence that followed was thick, full of all the alternate versions of their lives that could have been. Then she said, "But maybe we had to lose each other to become who we are now." He looked at her, really looked, and saw what she meant, the faint tiredness under her eyes, the wisdom that only comes from breaking and mending too many times. He nodded. "Maybe." A month later, she told him she'd been accepted into the Paris program. He congratulated her, sincerely, though his heart felt heavy. "When do you leave?" 2 months, she said. "It doesn't feel real yet." He smiled. "You'll love it there. All that light, all those stories. It'll suit you." She hesitated, then said, "Will you come visit?" "Maybe," he said, and they both knew what that meant. They spent those last weeks like people trying to memorize each other in fragments. Coffee shops, late walks, photographs that didn't need explanations. They never spoke of what would happen after she left. Maybe because they already knew. One evening, as they sat watching the sun dip behind the skyline, Clara said, "I don't want this to be a goodbye story." "It doesn't have to be," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "But it probably is." And he couldn't argue with that. On her last night before leaving, Nathan met her at the train station. She was standing by the platform, suitcase by her side, the night air filled with the metallic hum of departure. He handed her a small envelope. "Open it later," he said. She smiled through the sadness. "You're still the dramatic one. I learned from the best." The speaker announced her train. They both hesitated. "Nathan," she said, "thank you for finding me again." He tried to smile. "I don't think I ever stopped." And then she leaned in, kissed him softly. Not the kiss of a beginning, but of a farewell that knew how much it hurt to end. She stepped onto the train. He watched as it pulled away, carrying her into a blur of light and distance. When she was gone, he opened his camera and took one last photo of the empty tracks. The shudder echoed faintly against the night. Weeks later, in Paris, Clara would open the envelope and find a photograph, the one of the riverbank, where they'd first met again. On the back, written in Nathan's uneven handwriting, some stories don't need endings. They just need to be remembered. 3 years had passed since Clara left for Paris. 3 years since Nathan had last heard her voice in person, though sometimes, late at night, when the city went quiet and his camera sat idle by the window, he swore he could still hear her laugh and the hum of the wind. Life didn't stop for him. It never does. It simply reshaped itself into something quieter. He took on more photography work, started teaching part-time, and moved into a small apartment overlooking the river. Not the same one where they'd met, but close enough that the reflection of light on the water looked almost identical. He told himself he was content. He told himself the ache had faded. But sometimes, when he passed couples in conversation, or when the evening light hit his window in that familiar amber way, he would still pause, caught between what was and what might have been point one evening. Nathan was cleaning old film rolls when he found the last undeveloped one from years ago, the roll Clara had given him, the one she had developed for him the first time they reunited. There was something poetic about that, he thought. A circle waiting to close. Curiosity tugged at him. He took it to the same old lab downtown, the one that still smelled of dust and time, and waited as the technician processed it. When he picked up the prints, he noticed something strange. Among his photos, the city, the rain, her silhouette, there was one he didn't remember taking. It was a picture of him. Focused perfectly, natural light on his face, his camera in hand, and written on the back in faded ink. So you don't forget how you looked when you were still learning to see. He froze. The handwriting was unmistakable. Clear as he turned the photo over again, feeling something old stir inside him. Not pain exactly, but a kind of warmth that hurt in its own gentle way. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about her. About where she might be now. If she'd stayed in Paris. If she'd forgotten him. He opened his laptop and searched her name. The first result was a feature article from a European art magazine. Clara Bennett, Finding Truth in Silence. She looked different in the photos, older, maybe more sure of herself. But her eyes were the same. He read the piece. It spoke of her success as a writer and teacher. Her exhibitions inspired by the stories people leave behind, and how one of her projects had been dedicated to an unnamed photographer who taught her how to see beauty in what fades. Nathan closed the laptop and sat still for a long time. Months passed before he finally decided to reach out. He didn't send a message or an email. He sent a photograph. It was a shot of the riverbank, the same place they had met again, the place she'd photographed for him. The light was softer this time, the colors muted. On the back, he wrote only 3 words, still learning, always. He mailed it to the art studio listed in her magazine feature. Then, he waited. 3 weeks later, a small envelope arrived in his mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. No letter, no return address, just a photograph. It showed a Parisian street at dawn, soft fog curling through the air. In the foreground, a cafe table with 2 empty cups. On the back, her handwriting again, then keep learning. The light's still there. Nathan smiled. It was enough. He didn't need more. But fate, in its strange and quiet persistence, wasn't done with them yet. That winter, his photography work took him to Europe for a gallery collaboration, small exhibitions across Italy, Germany, and finally France. He hadn't planned to visit Paris specifically, but his last stop brought him there. As if the city itself had been waiting. He arrived late one evening. The air cool and damp, the streets glimmering from recent rain. As he walked through Montmartre, his camera slung over his shoulder, he caught sight of a familiar bookstore. One of those places with yellowed paperbacks stacked to the ceiling and a cat sleeping on the counter. Something drew him inside. And there, in the far corner, surrounded by people flipping through poetry books, was Clara. Time didn't announce itself in moments like that. It just paused. She hadn't seen him yet. Her hair was shorter now, her coat a deep shade of burgundy, and she was reading something with her head slightly tilted, the same tilt she'd always had when she was lost in thought. He stood there for what felt like a lifetime before finally stepping closer. "Excuse me," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes blinking in disbelief. Then her lips curved into a slow, incredulous smile. "Nathan?" "Hi," he said, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. "Didn't think I'd find you in a bookstore." She laughed quietly, the sound familiar and distant at once. "And I didn't think I'd ever see you here." They stood there, just looking at each other, two ghosts who had somehow become real again. They went for coffee afterward, naturally. The cafe she chose was small, tucked between two narrow streets, lit by the golden hue of lamps and rain reflections. For the first few minutes, they said almost nothing. It was as if they were both afraid to speak, in case words shattered the fragile miracle of the moment. Then she said, "I got your photo." He smiled. "And I got yours. I figured you would." She stirred her drink absent-mindedly. "You never could resist chasing the light. And you never could stop leaving little pieces of yourself behind in every photo," he said. She looked up at him. "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "Letting go. Back then." He thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But I think we had to. Because we weren't ready. Because we needed to understand what we were missing." She nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And now," he said quietly, "I think I just want to know you again. Without the fear. Without the pretending." She leaned back, studying him. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," he admitted. "But maybe it doesn't have to be impossible." They spent the next days together, walking through Paris like they were rediscovering a language they used to speak fluently but hadn't practiced in years. They visited galleries, shared meals, got lost in back streets. It wasn't romantic in the dramatic sense. No grand declarations, no desperate kisses. It was quieter, truer. Point one night, while crossing Pont Neuf, Clara stopped and looked out over the Seine. The water shimmered beneath the streetlights, catching fragments of moonlight like memory itself. She said softly, "Do you ever think about how strange it is, the way people return to each other? Like the world keeps looping until it finds the right moment." Nathan smiled. "Maybe we're just stubborn. Or maybe," she said, glancing at him, "some stories just refuse to end wrong." They didn't talk about the future. Neither of them needed to. She had her work, her students, her quiet mornings in Paris. He had his photography, his exhibitions, his small life of noticing things. But sometimes, their worlds overlapped, like light crossing water. They began writing letters again, even though they lived in the same city now. Letters filled with small observations, a favorite park bench, the smell of bread in the morning, the way the light hit her window at 5 p.m. It wasn't about longing anymore. It was about presence, the rare kind that asks for nothing except to be shared. A year later, Nathan opened a new exhibition titled Echoes of Ordinary Light. Among the photos, streets, windows, reflections, there was one that drew everyone's attention. A picture of a woman standing by the Seine, looking away from the camera. The light caught her hair just enough to make her glow, but her face remained unseen. When asked about it, Nathan simply said, "It's not about who she is. It's about what she reminds me of. That sometimes the most important people in our lives aren't the ones who stay forever, but the ones who teach us how to see." Clara attended quietly, standing near the back of the crowd. When their eyes met, she smiled. And he smiled back, the kind of smile that says, "We made it." After the exhibition closed, they walked together down the same riverbank where everything had begun. The city lights shimmered against the dark water, the air cool but calm. "Funny," she said softly. "All this time, and we ended up here again." He nodded. "I guess some stories just know their way home." They stood there for a while, side by side, saying nothing. And in that silence, that simple, wordless space, everything they'd lost, found, and learned folded quietly into the present. Not a happy ending, not a tragic one. Just two people who had once loved each other deeply, and somehow, after all the years, had found a new way to love, softer, steadier, infinite in its simplicity. When the night grew colder, Nathan turned to her. "Do you think we'll ever stop running into each other?" Clara smiled, eyes glimmering under the streetlight. "Only if the universe gets tired of telling our story." He laughed. "Let's hope it doesn't." They began walking again, the sound of their footsteps fading into the rhythm of the city, into the gentle hum of life continuing, beautifully unfinished.